Elizabeth Bathory, born into the highest levels of Hungarian nobility in 1560, Elizabeth Bathory is widely recorded as one of history's most infamous female figures. Following the death of her husband, she used her immense wealth and untouchable aristocratic status to turn her estate into a site of unimaginable horror. She was accused of luring countless young women from the surrounding peasant villages with the promise of well-paying domestic work. Instead of finding employment, these young women were subjected to systematic torture and murder within the castle walls. While the popular myth that she bathed in the blood of virgins to maintain her youth was likely a sensationalized fabrication added years later, the historical reality was brutal enough. In 1610, investigators led by György Thurzo collected testimonies from over 300 witnesses confirming the horrific abuse. Because of her noble blood, Bathory was spared public execution and was instead bricked inside a set of rooms in her own castle. She remained in total solitary confinement until her death 4 years later, forever earning the title of the Blood Countess. Irma Grisi. Operating as a guard at Nazi concentration camps during World War II, Irma Grisi became a chilling symbol of the regime's capacity for evil. Rising rapidly through the ranks of the SS, she was transferred to Ravensbrück, Auschwitz, and eventually Bergen-Belsen. By the time she was just 20 years old, she held absolute, terrifying authority over tens of thousands of female prisoners. Survivors of the camps testified that she was known for her extreme and unpredictable cruelty toward the prisoners. She would frequently walk the camp grounds with a trained attack dog, taking visible sadistic pleasure in inflicting severe physical and psychological trauma. Furthermore, Greece actively participated in the selection processes, condemning countless innocent women and children to the gas chambers. When British forces liberated Bergen-Belsen in 1945, she was immediately captured and forced to stand trial for war crimes. Found guilty of her horrific crimes, she was executed by hanging at the age of 22, remaining entirely remorseless to the end. Wu Zetian. As China's only legitimate female emperor in its massive history, Wu Zetian secured her power through absolute, uncompromising ruthlessness. And starting her life at court as a low-ranking concubine, she manipulated the political landscape with unparalleled brilliance and lethal ambition. To secure the throne and eliminate her rivals, she established a vast, highly efficient network of secret police and spies. Wu Zetian ordered the executions, forced suicides, and exiles of thousands of political opponents, including members of her own family. Historical texts even suggest she may have murdered her own infant daughter to successfully frame a rival empress, though the exact truth remains debated by scholars. Despite her reign bringing periods of significant economic prosperity and military expansion to the empire, her legacy is soaked in blood. She maintained her iron grip on the dragon throne through a terrifying culture of purges and absolute paranoia. Da Ilse Koch. As the wife of Karl Otto Koch, a notorious camp commandant, Ilse Koch became a global symbol of Nazi brutality and moral depravity. Although she was not an official SS guard, she utilized her husband's absolute authority to enforce her own terrifying reign of cruelty over the prisoners. She was infamous for riding her horse through the campgrounds, reportedly striking any prisoner who dared to look in her direction. Following the war, horrifying testimonies emerged from survivors claiming she collected grotesque souvenirs made from the remains of murdered prisoners. While some of the most sensational claims were heavily debated in court, her participation in the systemic abuse and embezzlement of prisoner property was undeniable. She was tried by the American military and later by a West German court, ensuring her name would be permanently tied to the horrors of the Holocaust. Koch ultimately took her own life in her prison cell in 1967, escaping a lifetime sentence, but failing to escape her horrific historical legacy. Mary the First of England. Forever immortalized by the grim nickname Bloody Mary, Mary Tudor's reign was defined by an intense, violent religious conflict. As the first Queen Regnant of England, she made it her absolute divine mission to violently reverse the English Reformation. She viewed the Protestant faith not just as a religious heresy, but as a direct, treasonous threat to her crown and her soul. To enforce the return to Catholicism, she revived ancient medieval heresy laws, leading to the brutal Marian persecutions. Over the course of just 5 years, she ordered the horrific executions of nearly 300 religious opponents by burning them at the stake. These public spectacles of agony were designed to terrify the English populace into complete religious submission. While her political maneuverings were complex, the visceral horror of the burnings permanently cemented her legacy as a tyrant. Catherine de' Medici. Born into a powerful Italian banking family, Catherine de' Medici became the Queen of France and one of the most ruthless political figures in European history. Acting as the true power behind the throne for her three sons, she engaged in relentless political maneuvering to protect the Valois dynasty. Her rule occurred during the French Wars of Religion, a deeply unstable period marked by massive bloodshed between Catholics and Protestant Huguenots. Catherine is forever linked to the horrific St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in 1572. What was initially planned as a targeted political assassination of Protestant leaders quickly spiraled into a catastrophic, uncontrolled mob slaughter. Thousands of Huguenots were dragged from their homes and murdered in the streets of Paris and across the French countryside over several weeks. While historians debate whether she intended the mass slaughter, her willingness to authorize extreme violence to secure political control earned her a terrifying reputation. Belle Gunness. Standing nearly 6 feet tall and possessing immense physical strength, Belle Gunness is remembered as one of America's deadliest female serial killers. Her entire operation was a cold, calculated business model designed to lure victims to her farm strictly for their money. Desperate and wealthy suitors traveled to her Indiana estate carrying their life savings, never to be seen or heard from again. Gunness systematically poisoned or bludgeoned her victims, burying their remains in the soft dirt of her hog pen. In 1908, a mysterious fire completely destroyed her farmhouse, leading authorities to finally uncover her gruesome secrets. Investigators sifting through the smoking ruins found the dismembered remains of over a dozen people, including her own children. They also found the body of a headless woman, but mystery still surrounds her ultimate fate. Because the headless body could never be definitively identified as Belle, many believe she faked her own death and vanished with her stolen fortune. Enriqueta Martí, known terrifyingly as the Vampire of Barcelona, Enriqueta Martí presented a horrifying dual life in early 20th century Spain. Operating in a city divided by extreme wealth and crushing poverty, she was accused of abducting destitute children directly off the streets. When police finally raided her apartment following the disappearance of a young girl, they uncovered a house of horrors. Martí was running illegal brothels and operating as a black market healer for Barcelona's wealthiest, most corrupt citizens. She became one of Spain's most feared criminals when evidence suggested she was murdering the abducted children to harvest their remains. These remains were allegedly turned into supposed medical cures, ointments, and cosmetics that she sold for exorbitant prices to the local elite. And she was murdered in prison before she could face trial, taking the full, gruesome truth of her crimes to the grave. Griselda Blanco long before Pablo Escobar dominated global headlines. Griselda Blanco was a major, terrifying figure in the international drug trafficking underworld. Known extensively as the Black Widow and the cocaine godmother, she pioneered the massive, violent smuggling routes of the Medellin cartel. Blanco transformed the streets of South Florida into an absolute war zone, utilizing extreme violence to eliminate business rivals and enemies. She is heavily linked to numerous killings, demanding absolute loyalty and showing zero hesitation in ordering the assassinations of anyone who crossed her. Her ruthless tactics included the invention of the motorcycle drive-by shooting, thus an assassination method that effectively revolutionized cartel violence. She even orchestrated the murders of her own husbands, securing her dark nickname and cementing her absolute authority in the criminal underworld. Aileen Wuornos. Surviving a childhood of unimaginable abuse and trauma, Aileen Wuornos lived a transient, dangerous life on the margins of society. Working as a sex worker along the highways of Central Florida, she was eventually convicted of multiple murders between 1989 and 1990. Wuornos shot and killed 7 different men who had picked her up, sparking a massive, highly publicized manhunt. Upon her arrest, she claimed self-defense in some cases, stating that the men had violently assaulted or attempted to assault her. However, the prosecution successfully argued that she was a predatory serial killer who murdered her victims purely for financial gain. Her case became widely debated, highlighting massive societal failures regarding trauma, poverty, and the justice system's treatment of marginalized women. She was ultimately executed by lethal injection in 2002, leaving behind a complex, tragic, and fiercely debated legacy. Myra Hindley. In the 1960s, a series of horrific crimes completely shattered the innocence of the British public and dominated the national press. Myra Hindley, alongside her partner Ian Brady, was heavily involved in the notorious abduction, torture, and murder of 5 children and teenagers. Her case shocked the nation, not just because of the extreme brutality, but because she actively used her gender as a weapon. Hindley acted as the unthreatening decoy, using a calm, reassuring demeanor to lure innocent victims into their vehicle. The subsequent discovery of the victims' graves on the moors, along with horrific audio recordings kept as trophies, horrified the world. Because of her willing participation in the destruction of innocent children, she became the ultimate symbol of evil in Britain. Despite decades of appeals and public campaigns to be released, she remained despised by the public and died in prison in 2002. Amelia Dyer. Amelia Dyer ran a horrifyingly simple and lucrative baby farming operation in 19th century England. She exploited the severe social stigma and crushing poverty associated with having a child out of wedlock in the Victorian era. Dyer placed these advertisements promising a safe, loving home, taking a lump sum of money from desperate, terrified young mothers. But instead of providing care, she pocketed the fee and ruthlessly strangled the infants within days of taking them. She was responsible for numerous infant deaths, expertly disposing of the small, weighted bodies into the River Thames under the cover of darkness. This horrific cycle continued unchecked for decades, as Dyer constantly moved and changed her aliases to avoid police detection. It wasn't until a bargeman fished a mysterious package out of the river in 1896 that a massive investigation finally brought her down. Caught through a partially legible address on the wrapping paper, Amelia Dyer became known as one of Britain's worst criminals and was executed, Queen Ranavalona I. Taking the throne of Madagascar in 1828, Queen Ranavalona I ruled her island nation with an iron fist to prevent European colonization. She enacted fierce isolationist policies, systematically expelled foreign missionaries, and violently persecuted anyone who practiced the recently introduced Christian faith. Her reign was characterized by brutal, uncompromising control and a reliance on incredibly harsh punishments to maintain absolute authority over her subjects. She utilized the infamous Tangina ordeal, a trial by poison, to test the absolute loyalty and innocence of her people on a massive scale. Those who survived were deemed innocent, but those who perished were considered guilty, leading to the agonizing deaths of thousands. Because of executions, disease, brutal forced labor for massive public works, and constant military campaigns, the population reportedly plummeted during her 33-year reign. While she successfully defended her nation's independence, the devastating cost in human life made her one of history's most terrifying monarchs. Delphine LaLaurie, known to early 19th century New Orleans high society as an elegant, wealthy socialite, Madame Delphine LaLaurie hosted lavish parties in her massive Royal Street mansion. To the public, she presented a perfectly refined image, but the reality behind closed doors was a monstrous nightmare. LaLaurie became infamous for the extreme abuse, starvation, and systematic torture of the enslaved men and women she owned. The horrific truth was finally exposed when a mysterious fire broke out, forcing responders to break into her locked, barricaded attic. The case completely shocked New Orleans society when the public discovered a literal torture chamber filled with emaciated, mutilated victims chained to the walls. As an enraged, violent mob gathered outside to tear down her home, LaLaurie managed to escape into a carriage and fled the country to Paris. Despite the severity of her crimes, she never faced justice, and her house remains one of the most infamous, terrifying buildings in America. Maria Mandel. Rising to become a high-ranking officer at Auschwitz, Maria Mandel was known among the terrified prisoners simply as the Beast. In her position as head of the women's camp, she wielded absolute, unchecked authority over 500,000 female prisoners and subordinate guards. She approached her terrifying role with absolute devotion to Nazi ideology and calculated a chilling efficiency. She was directly responsible for standing at the gates and personally selecting thousands of innocent women and children to be sent directly to the gas chambers. Adding a layer of psychological torture to her physical brutality, Mandel created the notorious Women's Orchestra of Auschwitz. She forced these prisoner musicians to play cheerful classical music, while other inmates were marched to forced labor or their deaths. Captured by the U.S. Army after the war, she was tried in Krakow and executed for her horrific crimes against humanity in 1948.